Hi, I'm Shannon Grissom. Are you looking to ignite your creativity? Or how about be inspired by a steady stream of muses? Welcome to Painterly Life, the podcast that celebrates those who create, inspire, and innovate. So, whether you're looking to spark your next big idea, reignite your passion, or simply soak in some creative energy, this is the place for you. Painterly Life, where every guest is a new muse just for you. Welcome to the Painterly Life podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Grissom. Today, I'm joined by Renaissance woman Juliet Blackwell. Juliet is an artist, an anthropologist, world traveler, and New York Times best-selling author. Join us as we explore the magic and creativity behind her amazing journey. Welcome, Juliet.
Hi, Shannon. Thank you so much for having me on. And you just gave me, I've never been called a Renaissance woman before, so I'm going to capture that. I like that.
Well, you are. You do everything, and you do it all well.
Well, thank you. I always feel like I have a bit of a frenetic background, but if it's, I like Renaissance better. That's nice. Yes.
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 So you've lived such a wonderfully creative life. What was your childhood like? Were you always doing all sorts of wonderful things? How did it all begin?
My mother was a big reader, so I've always been a reader, and so I think people who read a lot tend to be into a little bit of the fantasy life, and experiencing different lifetimes through books. I think that was a big part of it for me, and I've always. I know that you're a visual artist as well. I've been drawing and painting since I was a little kid, so that was very exciting for me. To tell you the truth, it was a very kind of standard childhood back in the day. Grew up in the South Bay. My dad was in the military for a while, and then worked kind of a regular job after that, but was always in the reserves, so he was gone a lot. My mom stayed home with us for a while, and then she went back to work as a proofreader editor, so she's always been into the book thing. But it was a great childhood. It was in the South Bay back when there were orchards, and we would just kind of, back then, we would run free in the summers. My mom would kind of kick us out of the house and say, come back for dinner, and we'd just explore, and it was really fun. I'm the youngest of three girls, so my older sisters would kind of take me on adventures. So it was very, very fun, and we did live in our minds a lot. I think we would take a story we had read and sort of act it out, and it was fun. It was very fun. It was very imaginative. I wonder now, I don't want to be one of those old people who's like, these kids today with their screens. But I do wonder about the imagination. I think back then, without the screens, we were more in our own imaginations as children, because we were bored. And boredom often leads to creativity, I think. And so we would make up games and make up plays, and and that, I think that really fed the imagination.
I think it does. I noticed that you grew up in Cupertino. Our kids went to Monte Vista.
Yes, that's where I went. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, wow, that's cool. What a small world.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, what a great place to grow up.
It was very suburban, but back then we still had a lot of, there were horses nearby and orchards, and it was a beautiful area. Yeah.
I think in that area it was the best of both worlds, because you're just on the edge of the country, so you could go either way.
Right, exactly. Yes.
So I'm thinking about your path, and I really think you are a true Renaissance woman. Your anthropology background, writing, painting, producing, you've done a lot of different things, and it seems eclectic, but what's your common thread with all?
I think it's funny, I didn't really think about it until I was speaking with a number of writers at a writer conference, and a number of people had a background in anthropology, as I do. And I thought to myself, oh, that's really interesting. But it makes sense to me that an anthropologist would become a writer, because I think as anthropologists, we're trained to observe people and behavior and culture and the clash of cultures and, all of these sorts of things that really, when you're writing, I think it becomes that's how you kind of create your characters with this sense of what's unique about somebody, what is special about someone. And then I was also a social worker, and I think social workers are also trained to observe human behavior, right? And to when people speak, they don't always speak the truth per se. You try to read things into what people are telling you, with the context that you're given. And then I went on to be a painter and to work I had my own decorative painting studio, and did a lot of murals. I love doing portraiture personally, but for the work I was doing more architectural painting, so restoring old houses, and painting, doing decorative painting and that kind of stuff. And again, it's all about seeing the world, right? And that's what painting is to me, is seeing the world and interpreting it through my own eyes. So it was, I think I'm probably naturally an observer. I love watching people. I love watching nature. And I'm the person at a party who might well be standing in the corner and not talking with anyone. And I'm not bored. I'm just really interested in watching everybody. So I hope that's not creepy ever. But yeah, I just really enjoy kind of watching how people interact, and getting a sense of who they are through their actions more than their words. So I think that there is a thread there. I'm very interested in people, in culture, in language, and also in old houses, which is also how I wound up working in so many old houses.
So you do have an old house. So
I
tell us
do.
about
It
your
is
house.
I mean, for California standards, it's an old house. It was built in 1911. So yeah, it had its 100-year anniversary a little while ago. We had a little party for it. It's
I love that.
it's a beautiful, beautiful house. It was something of a wreck when I moved in. It had been abandoned for a couple of years. No heat, no hot water. Things falling apart the way they do on old houses. At that time, I was working though with a lot of contractors, because I was working at that time as the decorative painter. So I knew a lot of people on renovation projects. So I was able to trade a lot, do a lot of bartering to get things done.
Awesome.
Because as you know, it's a fortune to try to redo a house. So it's been little by little. It's not like I didn't have a few $100,000 to come in and fix things. So I sort of have been doing it bit by bit.
Yeah.
It's definitely a labor of love, but it's a beautiful old house. And it's a real, to me, it's very much a work of art. And I love being able to live in a beautiful space that has, I think, a few ghosts, perhaps a few spirits. So it feels good. It's really a lovely place.
Do your spirits, are they partly characters in your books too? Do they come and help you write?
It's funny, because when I speak about this, I do write often about paranormal themes, with paranormal themes, and so people often ask me, do you believe in ghosts? Do you believe in spirits? And I frankly don't know exactly what I believe. I do believe that there's more to this life than we see with our scientific minds. I think that there's something that is not, that we have not been able to detect or understand, but there are vibrations, I believe, especially, and I think it's one reason I like history so much and historical structures, because I feel that. I can feel the sense of people who've come before, of the spirits that may or may not live in the walls, but I feel something. And I respect that.
Yeah.
I think it's, and I think I'm to the point now where I don't necessarily need an answer to whether they're there, whether they're, whether it's a ghost per se, or just some sort of electromagnetic feeling, whatever it is. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
it's a part of what we live with, and I do think it's part of creativity. I think there are feelings that are kind of floating around that we can channel through our art or our writing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so I try to respect it even if I don't understand it, if that makes sense.
Oh, it totally makes sense. No, I'm one of those people that when the lights blink, I'm I'm asking who's around rather than thinking
Right?
it's an electrical
Right.
issue.
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
it totally makes sense. And yeah, so I feel like, create creativity comes from all kinds of places, and it's not I'm not an isolated, it's not just me painting or writing or doing whatever I'm doing. You're interacting with the environment around you, so some of it's obvious and present and some of it's not.
Right.
So yeah, I totally get that. You do incorporate your art in your writing. So I love that you weave all these various aspects of what goes on. So tell me about how you do that. Or are you working on a particular series right now, or a particular
I'm
theme?
actually working on a not a series per se. I see it as a trilogy. I'm not sure how it will end up, but it's a little bit different for me. It's probably in my it's in my wheelhouse in that it does have to do with some paranormal aspects and a really old mansion. But I'm setting it in the Angels Creek area. Is it Angels Creek? Sorry, Angels Camp area
Hmm.
of California. That's an area
Okay.
that I find really interesting with just the gold rush background and the copper rush, and now it's
Yeah.
kind of become a touristy area. It's just an interesting area to me. So I'm setting a hopefully a trilogy there. But the book that's in the pipeline right now that will come out this summer is set in Monterey, and it does have to do also. It has to do with the
Hmm.
main character is a history professor who writes about the history of witchcraft and the occult, but she doesn't actually believe in it. She sees it as a historical theme, and then of course she sees something she can't explain, so she has to look into it, and it has to do with a murder as well. There's a murder. So there's always a murder. Yes, yes. But I do love to bring in obviously my love of old houses, and yeah, and I think that the painterly part of me is always in there somewhere too, because I love the colors, and I really
Yes.
when I write, I really see the story as a movie in my mind. It's very visual for me.
Mm.
So
Mm-hmm.
a big part of my job is trying to bring those put those visuals onto the page, which is not always easy. um, it's rarely easy, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
But that's, to me, I'm seeing it very vividly in my mind, which again, until I started speaking with other writers and realizing that not everybody sees their story that way. But to me, it's very cinematic in my mind.
That makes sense when you think about there are people who are visual learners, auditory learners, depending on what their
Right.
dominant sensory input is, and so that totally makes sense as far as how you see it and how you work with it. I'm very auditory for a visual
Uh-huh.
artist. That's kind of I don't know where that came from, but
Mm.
so I hear things a lot, and so I've got that visual
Yeah,
auditory
interesting.
thing going. I just went to the Monet immersive experience, and and that got me thinking about you
Uh-huh.
and your gardens and how you're and so do you paint with plants, or I mean you've got extensive,
Yeah.
you're really into your garden, so
The
tell me
garden for
about
me
that.
is a it's a meditation. It's definitely a um it's being out, feeling the earth, smelling the smells. It's very, it's very much for me kind of when I'm not sitting and writing, which is, I do a lot of sitting, unfortunately. So I'm like, I'm going to get out in the sunshine and garden. And as we're lucky in California, we can be outside most of the year. With the exception of very few days, really.
Yes.
So it just feels good to me to be outside. I'm not like a master gardener or anything. I do have a very nice vegetable garden, and we try to do a lot of California native plants and a lot of fruit trees, and try to eat as much as we can from our garden, which is, again, very lucky to do in California. But yeah, there's just something about it for me. I just get out, and it's very in my head, and it's very meditative. And I often come up with storylines or hear voices in my head talking, dialogue. Often dialogue comes to me when I'm gardening.
Yes.
So I think again, if there is such a thing as spirits, I think there are some spirits around in the land, in the garden, that speak to you. And I love that, in a garden, as I said, this house had been abandoned for a couple of years, and it was pretty trashed, but and the garden was as well. There were actually people living in the garden. It was kind of wild.
Oh wow.
But one thing I love about an old garden is that once you start watering it and taking care of it, the old plants start coming back. Plants that have been dormant underground, they return often.
Wow.
And you'll be like, oh, where did that dahlia come from? And it just kind of emerges from the earth. Not always, of course, a lot of plants die, but there's something, to me, truly magical about that, about seeing kind of history coming back up. Something that was there a long time ago, coming back to life. Old rose bushes, I read The Secret Garden when I was a girl, as a lot of people did, I'm sure. And there's something really beautiful about bringing a garden back to life. It's really lovely.
Well, that's a great parallel for creativity. A lot of people have put their creative lives on hold to do whatever they need to do. And, but I love that it could be abandoned, it could be gone, but if you just water it, it'll come back. And parts of it that die off, you just prune it and go with what's working.
Exactly.
I love that. So your garden sounds like a great way of getting grounded and filling your well.
Yes, I think so. I mean, it is obviously, it's a little exercise, and it's being outdoors. Again, I mean, I think the thing that I least like about writing is that it's so sedentary. It's I have friends who do the walking, they do a standing desk and they have the walking thing, and I just can't do it. I have to sit down and write. And so it is very sedentary. So I really need to build in, not just for my body, but I think for my mental health, I need to build in some exercise time. So I also usually take a really long walk every day. And that also, it's funny. I'll be walking for half an hour and just thinking, silly things, grocery lists and this and that. And then often I'll start to hear my characters talking to me after half an hour or so walking. So it's I think there's
I love it.
As humans, I think that there's more of a mind-body connection than we think there is. Or than a lot of us tend to think there is. And as again, back to anthropology, we are animals. I mean, humans are animals, and animals have instinctual paths that they follow. They respond to their body in a certain way, and I think that we've kind of trained ourselves away from that scientifically. So it's like, oh, you have to get some exercise because it's good for your blood pressure. And it's like, it is, but I also think it does something mentally to us as well, I think.
Yeah. I know it clears my head. I walk every day too. And I have the same thing, either song lyrics will come or an idea for a painting or whatever. And some of it's just walking around, but then all of a sudden praying, and I think that just,
yes,
gets me back on track.
No, exactly.
Because I can run amok. I was thinking you do a lot of traveling, so that obviously enriches your cultural exchange. The tell me about how travel works in with your writing and your all
It's
your creativity.
um, the writing per se. I do best when I'm here at home, at my desk in my office,
Okay.
in my house, with my neighbor's cat visiting, who's staring at me right now through the window. um, but but what the travel does, I think, for me, I mean, just and for most people who travel, I think it's um, you come up against things that do not feel every day, that are different than what you're used to. It's exciting. It's a lot of sensations coming at you all the time. What I do when I travel is I take a lot of notes. I have journals. I always bring a journal with me, and I take a lot of notes. And the notes can be about history. It can be about the way the clouds look that day. It can be. I also sketch in my journal. um, and yeah, it's I think it's the interaction with different kinds of people who have different kinds of expectations. That's a big part of it. Just and different lives that they live. We usually spend time. My boyfriend is French, so we spend a lot of time in France, but we also spend a lot of time in Spain, which is one of my favorite places. And I speak Spanish very fluently, so it's fun because we've made friends, and we get to know people who have, again, just very different experiences. I also find that Europe in general is much more artistically inclined than the US. There's just a lot of art everywhere, a lot of street art, a lot of uh, galleries, there just seems to be, it might just be my impression, but there seems to be a lot more embracing of the art forms, of lots of different art forms, music and dance, and there's just a lot. It seems to me to be much more present than it does here. And the same is for history. You can't go very far before you're stumbling across some remnant of a Roman bath or something, and it's astonishing to me to see those remnants. And I know that we have history here as well, but it does not feel as present to me as it does when I'm in Europe. So and then I did write several books that are based in France, and that was just fun because we would be in a different area of France, and I'd be like, oh wow, this is sort of interesting. This would be a fun place to locate a book. And I've been wanting to do the same for Spain, but the publisher hasn't been keen on it for some reason. So who knows why? Yeah. But yeah, the traveling is definitely, when you talk about refilling the well, it definitely does for me. And it's just nice, I think, to be taken out of your everyday life for a little while and encounter something different. I went to Japan a couple of years ago, and
Yes.
that was really fascinating because it was so different from. I am able to go to Europe every year, and it's not that it becomes humdrum or anything, but it's more familiar, the Europe, because I do speak some French and Spanish. And
Okay.
in Japan, I went with my 10 words that I learned from Duolingo, and just a lot of crossing of fingers. The people were incredibly kind, and polite and helpful, and but it was very different. It was just a very different culture, and it's really fascinating to be dropped in there, and even just morphologically, I look very different, right? So now I'm suddenly in all these rooms of people that don't look like me and sticking out like a sore thumb, and probably weighing twice what most people weigh there in Japan. So yeah, it's just a different. That was very fun, very fun. Another thing I love about travel, about just another comment, is, to me, it proves kind of the relativity of time, because if you're in Japan for 10 days, and it looms large in my imagination as if I had lived there for 6 months, whereas here 10 days can slip by without me noticing, really. And to me, when I travel, I think it's because there's so much sensation and so much that you're seeing and so much you're learning constantly that it's fills you up and kind of stretches time out. And I find that really fascinating.
Wow. So yeah, my little mind is being blown here. I was thinking about how a song
Yes,
can
yes,
time
definitely.
travel, help you time travel, and then but I had never thought about time away and how that does. I mean, I can identify if you go on a trip and you know, okay, we did this, and it's all in your mind, and
Right,
it's there.
right,
But
right,
I can't tell you what I
right.
did last week here, here. So that's I hadn't thought about that. Wow, wow. Now I'm gonna trip on that
Mm.
after we're through. So so with all that you're doing, do you ever have either periods where you're stuck or times when you're stuck, and how do you get past that? If
Yeah, no, I do get stuck for sure, definitely. And what I usually do is spend more time in my garden or walk more, and I read a lot. That's usually when I give myself a lot of permission to sort of stop and spend the whole day reading um, someone else's novel instead of concentrating on my own. Usually that will do it in terms of the writing. Usually, if I read other people for a few days, then I get back into my own writing. Um, and that was a trick I learned from Stephen King. Actually, he wrote a great book on writing, which I believe is called On Writing, although I'm not positive. But it's a very slim book, but about his approach to writing, and it was very. I don't really read many books about writing, but I read his, and it was very good. And one of the things he said is to always read other people, that it the other voices and the way they describe things, and you'll stop as an author. I think um, I'll stop and I'll think, oh wow, that's how they describe that apple tree or whatever it was. That's how they look at that description, or how did they encapsulate this person's character in so few words. And I'll stop, and it's almost like a form of studying, but it also tends to sort of ignite the creative spark for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. I look at other people's paintings.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I look at other oracle card decks.
exactly.
How are they
Exactly.
doing this? And then it inspires me. Yeah. Um, so what advice would you give somebody starting out or somebody who wants to get started? They might be my age and have not pursued their creativity.
That's a great question, and I think, and people often, ask authors, I think, more than they ask visual artists, where do you get your ideas? That's one of those standard questions. And I think what they're really asking is, what
Yeah.
sparked you to do this, to actually write? I think that's what they're actually asking, is, what made you sit down and
Yeah.
write? Um, and the
Yes.
fact is, for me, when I talk about what inspires me, what gave me the idea, it can be anything from the daily newspaper to the squirrels in the yard, to, it can be anything really. But I think my mind works that way, and I don't think
Yeah.
everybody's mind works that way. And I do think it's a matter of giving yourself permission to sort of let your mind take a flight of fancy. It's something that we do as children quite naturally, and I believe that it's trained out of us. So by a very young
Yeah.
age, I think we're either identified as,
Mm-hmm.
oh, you're good at dancing, or you're good at baseball, or you're good at art, whatever it is. And if you're not good at it at a very young age, then you pretty much stop, right? Like almost all children want to draw, and then but by the
Yeah.
age of
Yeah.
what, maybe fourth grade, fifth grade, they no longer draw. They only take art class if they're good at art, you know. And I think that people they're not encouraged to keep that sort of
Yeah.
uh, flight of fancy open. And I think for a lot of adults, it becomes sort of crafts. We become more, we'll make like cards. People will make cards or something like that. That's more, perhaps slightly more tangible, or has like a use at the end of it, that it becomes a product as opposed to just something fun
Right.
that they do. And so that the whole goal is the end result as opposed to the doing of it. And I think the doing of it is really where the creativity is, and where
Yes. Yeah.
where it feels good. It's something that feels good to, I think, the human brain, is that we're creating something new and we're having fun. And that's what I feel like people miss out on a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, when I first started out, I wanted every painting to be a masterpiece, and I was so results driven. And now, I can
Uh-huh.
totally separate the painting experience from what I'm creating, because there are days when I have the most amazing
Right.
experience, and what's on the canvas isn't isn't
Right.
really, but it was, damn, that was good, right? Or sometimes
Right. Right.
it depends. I mean, sometimes they merge together and sometimes they don't. So yeah, and the older I get, the more I'm able to just really enjoy the experience. So I like what you're saying about, you know people allowing themselves, to create, just to create, and and when you feel the urge, just go
Right.
for it. And
Right. No, exactly. Exactly. I think we are way too results driven in this culture. That's one thing I would say. And as adults, I think people, a lot of people say that they don't read, or they don't whatever, because they don't have time. And I understand. Our time is taken up by having a job and taking care of kids and all of these things. But you can incorporate creativity in some of that as well. And I think that people do naturally incorporate, anybody who's raised children, that you spend a lot of time coming up with games, or helping them draw. And, I think a lot of people kind of rediscover some of their creativity through raising children or being around children. Um, but yeah, it's interesting how we do that, how we put so much emphasis on the end result at times. One of my favorite quotes. Do you know that quote from Martha Graham about creativity? Do you know Martha Graham? She was a choreographer, um, very famous choreographer, and she has a wonderful. It's kind of a long quote about basically. I think what she's saying basically is, don't get in your own way. She says that artists always have a sensation of divine dissatisfaction, that we're never quite pleased with where we get, because it's always the next thing, right? We always want the next thing. But she also says that it's not any of our business to assess how good our work is. that what we need to do is produce, because she says if you don't put it out there, it is lost to the world, because there's only one of you. And so there's only one of your creative spirit. And if you don't give it to the world, it's gone. And there's just something I just love. I just love that quote. If you look up Martha Graham with divine dissatisfaction, it will come up. It's a nice long quote about just doing it, just letting the creativity channel through you.
I love that. You're if you're not doing it, you're depriving yourself of the experience, and you're depriving
Yes,
the
yes,
recipients
exactly,
their own
exactly.
experience from having relating to your work.
Yes, no, exactly, exactly. And as you know, as an artist, you might create a painting with something in mind, right? Or maybe not something in mind. Maybe it's just pure creativity, whatever it is, or maybe you have a message. But people might take very different messages from that painting. They're not experiencing it the way you do. They're having their own experience with it, which is, to me, the beauty of art form, is that the artist had their experience with it, and now we have an experience with the painting, or with the sculpture, or whatever it is. And it's certainly that way with books. There's a a quote that a saying that no one reads the same book, because as you read a book, you're imagining things in your own mind, and you're bringing in things from your own past, and you're finding meaning in your own way in those that artist's words. And I love that. It's amazing. I mean, it's amazing as a writer to know that I've put these words out into the world, and people are taking them into their own minds and their own hearts the way they do, um, and each individually. It's pretty amazing.
It is. So it's like you've created one story, and then
Exactly. Which is what one reason it's so disappointing to watch a movie that's been made from a favorite book, because when we read a book, we have our own images, and then the movie is the image of the filmmaker. And it's almost never the same. Well, it's never the same, but every once in a while perhaps it's better, but it's often not as exciting as it was in one's mind, because that's, we've all had our own experience. Yeah.
yes. So what's currently lighting up your imagination?
Just got back from Europe. We were in Europe for a couple of months. So that always takes me a while to kind of reprocess all of that, I have to say. And I do go back through my notes and sort of glean things from the notes that I had been taking. And I'm also catching up with friends, which maybe sounds less creativity based, but I find I think it's part of that filling up one's well, just meeting with beloved friends, and spending time and laughing. We went to dinner with some friends the other day, and we just laughed through the entire dinner, and I thought, it's beautiful, right? It's that's what's really 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 lovely. I don't love the holidays, so I sort of try to spend the holidays just having like dinners with friends, and walks with friends, and going to the movies with friends, and that's, to me, that's touching base with those people is really lovely. And then the book that I said that I'm starting on, the trilogy, I'm just starting, so it's very exciting. It's always very exciting at the very beginning, because the possibilities are limitless, right? It's like, oh, what am I going to do with this? This is very exciting. So I'm kind of, if you could see my desk, there are papers everywhere. I'm sort of all over the place, but that's fun.
It is. So where can people find more about you?
The website is julietblackwell.net. So yeah, so that's where they can find me. And there's also, there are links to my email and all through the website as well. And the books should be anywhere. If I ask people if they can't afford books, which a lot of people can't. The libraries are amazing, and most libraries have a fund. If you ask them to buy particular books, they usually will, if they can. So that's nice, and that's a nice boon for the author too, to have libraries buy our books. So yeah. And obviously, if you can ask for books at any bookstore, which is always nice too.
Yay! Well, thank you. You've been incredibly inspiring. I mean, I love your journey.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and share so that we can make more inspiring episodes. That's a wrap. We'll see you next time.